So I wanted to address the problem with cyclical failure in our lives. And everybody has got a pattern of failure in some area of life, whether it's emotional, relationships, financial, or whatever it is. We all have something that we consistently get wrong in life. No matter how hard we try, whether it's a diet, whether it's exercise, or whether it's business, somewhere in our lives we have a pattern that we are following. And no matter how hard we try, we don't seem to be able to break that pattern. And I wanted to give a bit of understanding as to what is behind these cyclical patterns of failure, whether it's relationships, whether it's conflict, or whatever it is. I want you to apply these principles to that area in your life if you're looking to get a breakthrough. So the first thing that's really important is a lot of the failures that we face in life that really just keep going over and over, they are spiritual. And so often we are looking for natural solutions. We don't understand that the pattern of failure is actually a far deeper authority that's taking place in our lives. So just to let me backtrack a bit and understand, let me share how these failure patterns can get into place. So when we are born as children, we are under the spiritual covering of our parents. That means whatever they are allowing into their lives spiritually, those things have got those spiritual powers and authorities have got legitimate authority to flow into our lives. It doesn't really become that manifest in our lives until we become spiritually mature, considered almost an adult in the spiritual realm, where we are accountable for our own decision making. We have the clearness of thought and the mind to start to stand up and make our own decisions, and that generally takes place at around about 12 or 13 years old. It's around about puberty. It's also the time that the devil will put most of his effort into our lives to try and put us on a different path, a path where he has got authority in. So once we come out from under the authority of our parents, we're now standing in our own strength in the spiritual realm, our own sort of 2 feet. We are now open to the spiritual realm based on our own decisions, no longer under our parents' covering. And most people will, if they look back on time, they will be able to recognize some major events that happen around about that 12, 13, 14 year period in life. It's just when the devil puts the most effort into diverting your destiny. And so from about that time, there's a lot of rebellion that comes into kids' lives because we are now under all sorts of temptation from the spiritual realm. And a lot of things that we do are established, and they become more and more prevalent as we grow older. And those things remain in place. The spiritual realm remains in place until it's addressed at a spiritual level. And often people spend their whole life trying to overcome something in a natural level, and they just do not get success. They don't understand when they don't get a success. And as I say, it's a spiritual authority that's actually working against a person's destiny. A lot of these things happen. They can happen. How to get these authorities in place? Number one is who do we yield to? Whose authority do we accept, and who do we receive into ourselves spiritually? These could be a group of friends we can hang out with. They could be a partner. They could be a parent, a teacher. We at that age start to allow spiritual influence into our lives. We start to believe doctrines and teachings and ideologies. And when we start to receive that in those authorities that have often got a spiritual power behind them, they start to shape our thinking. And often when we've bought into a particular philosophy or a direction in life, there is a certain blindness that comes into a particular area. And it becomes very hard for us to be convinced of something outside of that. And people don't like to change their views once they've yielded in a spiritual matter to some authority or some direction. So that's one of the key events that happen. Another place where authority is established in our lives is where we have partners, sexual partners, and there's a spiritual transfer that comes into our life through that. And often those people they affect our lives for the rest of our lives. They have a spiritual impact in our lives, because where two people come together physically, there's a joining, there's a spiritual tie that's established, and whatever flows into that person's life can continue to flow into your own life long after that relationship is broken up. Whatever they're doing spiritually, if they go into their cult or they get involved in all sorts of evil activities, that spiritual flow can still come into our own lives through that tie that was established through physical relationships. So those are a couple of the key things that allow our thinking to be shaped and allow certain patterns to be established in our lives. Also, when we make certain utterances with our own tongue, we can go through a difficult time. And it happens to many people. When we go through a difficult time, we make an utterance. I will never let that happen again. I will never trust somebody. I will never go into another relationship again. I'll always be broke. I'll never lose weight. I'm so ugly. And we say things like that are said with a spiritual motivation. There's a spiritual authority provoking us into those utterances during a time of duress and stress. And we start to establish things that change our perception. They're deep line, deep-rooted perceptions that hold us in a pattern of thought. We might move on, we might change many things in our lives and mature and grow older, but those things have been established at a deep root level, and it continually has a way of shaping our destiny. So when we finally get to a stage where we feel we've got to we want to make some change, and everybody goes to that life as we mature and we get older, and we start to consciously make an effort to change, and we often get into a pattern of failure and success, and we really can't work out what's going on. It's because we are addressing it at a natural level. And I'll give you an example. Just say a person is just say a young girl wants to lose weight, and she's continually trying to lose weight, and but she goes through patterns of day-to-day living, and whenever she loses weight, there's a short time later she puts it back on, and she can't understand it because her whole desire and her will is to keep herself in good shape. But what actually happens, if you look beyond the natural part, there is a spiritual root that's behind that excessive weight. And I'll give you an example how it would be. Somebody goes through a traumatic stage as a young person, and while they're going through the traumatic event, they start to eat because they're anxious, and they find comfort in the food, and then they move on and they forget about it. But if they do it often enough, what actually happens is the overeating is actually a compensation for anxiety. And the thing about recovering somebody from this pattern is really finding out what is causing the anxiety. That's the key. That's the spiritual event. Is what is causing anxiety, and the response to that anxiety. So those are the things that I want to encourage people in. Is if you for example are looking to reduce weight in this example, it's not about that you're eating. It's what is causing your anxiety, what's causing your stress, and why is it affecting you. And that's the kind of thing when I'm talking about how to break patterns. And so just to give you a revelation of what I've learned about breaking deep-rooted spiritual patterns. How do I do it? Well, I always recommend you should do something like a 3-day fast. If you can fast 3 days in water, to me it's always proven to be a great breakthrough, because what actually happens, you might have a sense there's a spiritual root, but you need to get the revelation from God. And when you start fasting on water, it's the natural realm becomes a lot weaker in your thinking, your influence, and the spiritual input from God becomes a lot more clearer, and the conviction becomes clearer. And when we get the real conviction of what is holding us in this pattern, there's a couple of things that we normally have to do. And first of all, we will get the revelation of what it is that's actually behind our defeat and our ongoing failure. And that can often be a very strong conviction, and it bring us to tears and real remorse, and generally the outcome of that is we either renounce some sort of activity, we either forgive somebody, or we repent of something. And that comes from the conviction of God. It's not just our own revelation, a natural revelation, okay, I did something wrong. It's a real deep-seated spiritual revelation, and we repent and renounce those things, and then we ask God for restoration. And that's generally been my revelation of how to get breakthroughs, to get a real conviction of God about what is the root cause of the pattern of failure. And look, just to say in the interim to how to avoid getting into these patterns of defeat is, I think it's really important about who we get counsel from. Often we develop a friendship circle, and these people that we develop around us are similar to us, and they have similar defeats and failures, and they speak into our lives, and we accept their voices, and we accept their input, and we start to act on their input. And we don't look at their lives and say, there's failure in their lives, why would I take their input? Why would I listen to what they're saying? We take it as something that's worth accepting and receiving without really discerning if they have victory in that area. So I would first of all strongly recommend people to avoid getting counsel from people that are in a similar place of failure. The second point is, obviously, as I've mentioned, is to avoid looking at symptoms. The symptoms are the revelation of something that's behind that, a deeper cause, a spiritual cause, especially if as I say, we're talking about patterns that are reoccurring. The key is to find out what is the spiritual authority or power or pattern that's in place that needs to be undone. Don't look at symptoms. Once you deal with the spiritual cause, once you get the revelation and you can change that part, the issue that you're facing that is really causing distress will come in line. And then the third part, what I wanted to say is most of our patterns of failure comes out of rejection. We all face rejection. We all deal with rejection at whatever level. But rejection, the root cause of rejection, how rejection gets a hold in our lives, is mostly a break with the relationship with God. When mankind lost the relationship with God, there was a hole that was formed in our character, and that allows so many other issues to develop. So whatever issue you're facing, I would say the first step to really get permanent breakthrough is to get reconciled to God. Because once God can actually fill that gap that's creating that breach and allowing all these other cycles of failure to come in, once that gets restored, those patterns of failure have got far less effect, far less authority, far less damage in our lives. So I'd like to encourage you to take those steps in finding your own personal restoration and personal breakthrough.